Dr. Heather, thanks for being here. I'm so excited to get a chance to talk to you today.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Hey, so for anyone who's not necessarily familiar with you and your work around Hashimoto's and autoimmunes, can you just give us a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to be in this position you're in right now?
Yes, so I am a functional medicine practitioner. I've been practicing for about 22 years now. And the reason I got into this field in the first place is because I was dealing with my own health challenges. Many years ago, I was struggling with weight. I was about 50 pounds overweight. I was tired. My menstrual cycles were a mess. And, I go to the best OB-GYN in Austin, and essentially he tells me nothing's wrong with you. And oh, by the way, you're not going to ever be able to have children. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is not how my life is going to be. And so I set out on a mission to figure out how to change my own personal health. And as I was doing that and I was successful, I realized that there were millions of women who were struggling with these same symptoms of low thyroid. I diagnosed myself with Hashimoto's and really going down this whole autoimmune route and how to, put autoimmune diseases in remission. And that's what I'm passionate about. So now I'm here to really work to change the face of healthcare and get this message out to as many people as possible.
That's awesome. I think that a lot of times some of those, like the best work that we do comes from like the work that we put in on ourselves and the problems we've solved for our own selves. So yeah, I'm excited to get a chance to dive into that. But can you just talk a little bit about like what are autoimmunes and like how do we know if we have one of those or are a candidate for one of those? Can you just kind of break that down
Yeah,
for us?
so
But like
autoimmune.
like I'm five, you know?
Okay. If I need to break it down even more, just let me know. But autoimmunity is essentially genetic. It means that your immune system is tagging your body tissue for destruction, right? It's kind of tagging tissue to make your, part of your other immune cells to go and kill the tissue. There's many different autoimmune diseases. You can have autoimmunity to any tissue in your body. Now, like I said, it's genetic. So you're more predisposed to having an autoimmune condition if it's in your gene line. And if you have one autoimmune disease, you're at risk for developing multiple autoimmune diseases and even cancer. Now, and we can get into this later, but there's many things that you can do to actually prevent autoimmunity. And I want us to be clear that when something is genetic, it doesn't mean it's a life sentence. We now have the study of epigenetics where we know that genes are influenced by our environment. So we can influence genes to upregulate or downregulate, in other words, turn them on or turn them off to really maximize the best gene expression.
The way I've heard that described before is that genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so here is a good example. So I am a regenerative farmer as well as a doctor. And one day I was sitting at my breakfast table and I thought, how can I describe this whole epigenetics thing in an easy to understand way to patients? And so I was just thinking, like, how could I get this across? And it occurred to me that I have eggs for my chickens sitting on the countertop, right? And I also had the same eggs separately sitting in an egg container that were about to go into the incubator. So the eggs, they are the exact same genes, but some of those eggs are going to go into a different environment that would support the growth of a baby chick. The other eggs that are sitting on my counter are about to go in someone's stomach. So it's the exact same genes, but it's the environment that changes the gene expression, and they can totally turn out completely different.
That's a good way of describing it. And I'm so excited to chat about regenerative farming too, because I feel like that's one of the things that's probably on like the peak side of what we can be doing to take our health into our own control and get rid of some of these negative farming practices. And just like, it's like making this this complete new ecosystem that we are responsible for, rather than kind of the way we've gotten away from that with our modern culture and like gigantic mega farms only doing monocropping and all these things. So yeah, love to hear that you're actually not just practicing medicine, but you're actually practicing health in its full expression. That's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, we could
What
go
got you
on
into that?
for days. Yeah, well, COVID started that whole thing, right? I've always been looking for the best possible sources of animal proteins and vegetables, trying to eat clean as possible. And, for me, it was like when those things almost became endangered, like when you go to the grocery store and they weren't there, I started to grow my own food in my backyard. And then I just got the wild idea that I really wanted to get back to nature. So I went from the city and we bought a ranch, so that we could start really practicing regenerative farming with heritage breed animals that take a lot longer to grow than the animals that are more in an industrialized farming or ranching practices. So it's so cool because as a doctor, a functional medicine practitioner, you learn about the microbiome and you learn about how important your gut health is to everything. And then you start to think about, well, how do we optimize our gut health and our microbiome? Well, it's to diversify the food that you're eating, right? So you want to get a lot of different diversity in the vegetables and the plants and the animals that you're eating. But then you think about, well, how did those grow, and what is the good bacteria and the nutritional value of all of those things? And when you get into regenerative farming, you realize that the soil and the microbes in the soil are the most important thing to not only animal and plant health, but to our health as well. So I just went down that rabbit hole, and now we start to regenerative farm, and we have to rotate all of our animals, and I rotate all of the crops to really pay attention to the soil so that we're really optimizing our microbiome. And, for me to get as healthy as I possibly can, but also to provide food for communities around me.
So cool. So that sounds like one of those things that sounds like a really good idea on paper. And then when you start to do it, it's like, wow, this is 10 times harder than I thought it was going to be. How difficult was that process? I know you have 60 acres out in Texas, but like, did you buy a ranch with like an existing regenerative farm, or did you buy acreage and then have to like build it out yourself?
So I bought some acreage that was kind of like had horses on it. They had no other animals, right? So you can imagine the soil was not good. And they used glyphosate as weed killer. They didn't want to have to weed eat around the fencing and the paddocks. And, it was kind of, when I moved here, it was crazy because we couldn't believe it. We would sit out on the patio and there was no animals. There were no squirrels. There were no rabbits. There was nothing. And it was just bizarre. But as we started to retrain our ranch hand that helps us on the ranch, we retrained him. I said, get rid of all your pesticides, get rid of all of your herbicides, all of the insecticides, get rid of everything. And he's like looked at me like I had 10 heads. And so I said, we're getting rid of all of that. We have to start to, and I was teaching about regenerating the soil and how we had to rotate the crops. And so we had to get animals on the land. So the first thing that we did was, did a lot of research. We have some Highland cattle. We have some sheep and pigs and chickens that also help with fly control. So it's a lot of work, I would say. But as we continue to grow, just with being patient, because it does take time to regenerate all of that stuff. But I do have help. There's so much more that I could do, and I am working with somebody who essentially I can leverage her time. I need to clone myself, but I think that we're going to be able to hire someone that can really help get this moving in the right direction. But I will tell you, it is not profitable, not yet in any way. It is essentially I work to pay for the ranch at the moment.
Okay. Well, that's really good to know, because I think that like a lot of us have a glamorized view of like starting a commune and having our own farm. So, having like correct expectations is always helpful there. So, but that's fascinating. I want to ask you a million more questions about this, but we should probably talk about, the thing you came on the podcast to talk about.
That's
So
fine.
let's dive into autoimmunes and like especially, into Hashimoto's.
Hmm.
Like, I know that a lot of women suffer from Hashimoto's, but like there are also tons of men out there who are suffering from other autoimmune diseases. What are some things that we need to be paying attention to once we get the diagnosis that, hey, you have Hashimoto's, you have, you know, like, I mean, we can throw in like, rheumatoid arthritis, you have ankylosing spondylitis, you have something like this. What do we do next?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter the name of the autoimmune disease. All right. So a lot of people get caught up in whether it's Hashimoto's, is it ankylosing spondylitis, is it lupus, is it RA, is it Sjogren's, is it any of those things, right? So essentially, what it means is that the immune system is out of balance and it's essentially attacking and killing the body or some tissue in the body. So we need to understand, why is that happening? In traditional medicine right now, mostly what they're doing is giving biologics, and it really shuts down the immune system. They're giving low dose chemotherapy drugs to, again, shut down the immune system. But nobody's really addressing, why is the immune system out of balance and attacking the body, right? We've got to ask different questions, not just suppress the immune system, but we have to dig in and figure out what are the underlying triggers that are causing the immune system to attack the body. Now, these triggers will be unique to each individual, which is really, really important, because you have to understand the exact triggers so that you can address those to balance the immune system. That's why, autoimmunity, it takes time to work with somebody as a patient. It takes time to customize care. And it takes time because everybody is different and we don't all respond the same. But some of the triggers that people need to look out for when they are diagnosed with an autoimmune issue is, number one, is insulin resistance or blood sugar surges, right? Or a lot of blood sugar variability. When you have a surge in your blood sugar and you have an insulin spike, it can trigger the immune system to attack the body. All right. So, and I will tell you, we were talking a little bit earlier before the podcast started, how many Americans are dealing with obesity and, blood sugar issues. And I can pretty much assure you, if you have a weight problem, you're dealing with a blood sugar issue, regardless if you've been diagnosed with prediabetes or diabetes. So, blood sugar is huge. Underlying infections is also really important, whether it's an underlying viral infection, bacterial infection, yeast infection, parasitic infection. As a matter of fact, I just looked at a patient's labs and did an analysis, and it looks like she has a parasitic infection, she's got a yeast infection, and she's got a UTI. All she doesn't have any symptoms, right? She's got high blood sugar, she's got autoimmunity, she's got inflammation. And so we can be dealing with these underlying infections, and the immune system isn't giving us the signal that we have an acute infection, because it may be chronic or the immune system is just not working properly. So then we deal with
So you
toxins.
mentioned,
What? Go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned that when you have a blood sugar spike or an insulin spike, that will trigger the body to sometimes attack itself and have the immune system like attack different tissues of the body. Can you talk a little bit about how that works, or what, like, obviously controlling blood sugar is really, really important, but I never heard that specific mechanism before.
Yeah, so I'm really unsure exactly what causes that or why the body responds in that way. But just to be clear, if you have an autoimmune condition, when you have an insulin surge, it will cause the immune system to attack the body. But if you don't have an underlying autoimmune condition, then it's not going to like necessarily trigger autoimmunity, although it can. The other thing that's important is autoimmunity, a lot of times is triggered by stress. And so you can imagine how stressful it is for the body to be in a dysglycemic or in a dysglycemic state, or their blood sugar to be out of balance all the time. Because when you have these insulin surges, it causes inflammation, right? It causes damage to the arteries and leads to cardiovascular disease. So when you have insulin resistance, it is at the seat of all chronic degenerative diseases. And so it's kind of like the linchpin that is going to tell you if you're going to be healthy as you age or not.
We call, we kind of just wrap that up with a bow and call it metabolic syndrome, right?
Yeah.
And so I have like a a metric that I think of when someone's like, how do I know if I have this? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because I call it the burn score, or it's basically just your waist to height ratio. I know a lot of people do waist to hip, but I found that a waist to height ratio of 0.47 and below means you are in a pretty healthy insulin, like, what do you call it? Not resistance, the insulin sensitivity, right?
Yeah.
But 0.47 and above, that's like we're on now kind of on that sliding scale of insulin resistance. Have
Mhm.
you ever heard of that, or what's your response to that?
I haven't necessarily heard of those metrics, but for me, I'm always looking at labs, right? I'm always looking at blood work and we're looking at functional ranges. So we measure several different markers that would indicate whether someone has any kind of issue with their blood sugar. So there's 12 different markers that make up my dysglycemia panel. And yes, we're looking at fasting glucose, and yes, we're looking at your A1C. But the crazy thing is that those can be completely normal, but you have a lot of blood sugar variability, right? So we look at a marker called glycomark, which tells us how stable your blood sugar is, because so many women, they go to the doctor and they're like, well, I'm overweight, but my blood sugar's fine. They keep telling me my blood sugar is fine. And I look at their fasting glucose and their A1C, and yeah, it's fine, but their glycomark is super low, which means they have tons of highs and lows. So they're still getting those insulin surges. And then I also look at insulin. Insulin is almost always high. We want insulin below 5. And we know if it's above 5, it's causing inflammation in the brain, right? We know that that leads to cognitive issues over time. But we look at many different markers to identify whether someone has any kind of issues with their blood sugar. The other thing I do now with all of my patients is we use a continuous glucose monitor for at least 45 days. So we can see what they're doing during the day, at nighttime, especially if someone's not sleeping. It usually means they've got a blood sugar issue. And so that allows us to understand, do they have a blood sugar issue? And then we can see, is there food or stress or what's causing the sugar to spike? So we can really hone in there and customize care.
Okay, that's really interesting. I've never heard of the glucomark like metric as well. So that's cool that you have a multifaceted blood panel and analysis there. So it sounds like all of these things, all of this metabolic disease and autoimmunes can all be traced back to some blood sugar issues. Now, you mentioned that, like we were talking earlier, it's not really about calories in and calories out. And so would you say that blood sugar is as important, monitoring and managing your blood sugar levels correctly is as important as kind of what you're putting into your body and how many calories you're getting?
It's more important than how many calories you're getting, right? I think this whole calories in,
Hmm.
calories out is kind of ridiculous, because if you're eating the right foods and you're eating whole foods in the right proportions, it's almost impossible to overeat and get too many calories. But, like, if you take, for an example, you can have 500 calories of chocolate chip cookies and 500 calories of a grilled chicken breast, and it's going to have completely different physiological impact on what's going on in the body. But if we're still stuck on this calories in and calories out, it's like we can justify all day long what food we're going to eat and stay within the right amount of calories, but we're literally causing insulin surges all day long, whether it's we're not eating and then we're eating bad. And then you just keep going on this roller coaster. But instead, if we focus on the quality of the food that we're eating, we make sure we're getting enough protein, we make sure we're eating enough vegetables, and then we're watching our glucose, that is what's going to really lead to reversing this whole insulin resistance or stabilizing your blood sugar so that you don't have insulin resistance in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've always told my clients, like, it's calories aren't just calories, they're communication with your body as well. Like, what
Yeah.
is a chocolate chip cookie telling your body to do? What is it? How is it having your body respond versus the broccoli versus the chicken, whatever else? So I
Yeah.
think that, making sure that you're looking at things from that perspective, and also educating our clients on, what certain foods are doing to their body, so they can make an educated question. Cause I like to ask, like, say, when you're looking at your food, like, always ask the question of, how do I want to feel after this, rather than how do I want to feel when eating this, or what do I want this to taste like? And
Yeah.
I think
I
if we can
think
start creating those better questions and education,
Yeah.
makes a big difference.
Well, I think it's really important to understand that we eat food to fuel our body. Like we're not really eating food to it shouldn't be that we eat food to feel a certain way, even though we do that, and sometimes it's on occasion, sometimes it's way too much. But I think if we can think about like what I think about when I eat is how is this going to impact my blood sugar? Right. And I know that if it impacts my blood sugar in a negative way, I'm going to feel tired, right? If you have a blood sugar spike, then you know that your blood sugar is going to crash after you eat and you are going to feel tired. If you're not eating enough, you're going to feel tired in between your meals. You're going to get hangry. You're going to be cranky. So we've got to start looking at food as fuel. How do you want to fuel your body? What is the performance that you're trying to get out of your body? And if you're expecting your body to wake up with energy, you're expecting to get through the day, you're expecting to have good brain function. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to show up, and have your business, thrive, if you are an employee and you want to do a good job, or you're a mom that wants to show up for your kids, you've got to think about how you're fueling your body. Instead of eating for instant gratification, how is this going to affect me in the long term? And I do think having a continuous glucose monitor allows you to really see the impact. I mean, even for me, I was drinking a margarita and I had a glucose monitor on, and I thought, I just want to see. I know it's going to make my blood sugar go up, but I just want to see how high it makes my blood sugar go up. And I drank like a quarter of the margarita, and my my glucometer was beeping, and my blood sugar was like at 220, and I couldn't believe it because I don't have a blood sugar problem, right? Like I am always monitoring my blood sugar. And even when I drank that margarita, it just skyrocketed. And, it was helpful to have that feedback and to see how high it actually went. So then I'm like, I will never drink another margarita again. I would be fine just with, tequila and some sparkling water and lime and call it a day if I needed to drink.
That's fascinating. I've been making margaritas recently. I have a amino product called Fast Aid. It's like a lemon lime flavor. So I do a little bit of tequila, a little bit of like lime seltzer, a little bit of lime juice, and then a scoop of the Fast Aid in there. And I feel like I'm justifying that by being like, I'm building muscle. It's working. So next time you do that margarita, try the Fast Aid margarita. It's delightful.
Okay, I'll try that.
But so going back to the CGMs,
Yeah.
so obviously you're a functional medicine doctor. You know about nutrition, you know about blood sugar. What are some of the lessons that you've learned personally? We just dropped an episode like a month ago about 6 different lessons that we took from looking at like thousands of different CGMs and their data. What are some of the personal lessons that you've learned with maybe things that weren't intuitively obvious that you were surprised about having worn a CGM yourself and seen hundreds of clients do it as well?
Yeah. So the biggest lesson that I think I've learned is how much stress plays a role on your blood sugar. So I've been able to really dial it in. If I have a lot of stress on my plate or a lot of stuff going on at work, um, yeah, I'd be very diligent about my diet being more keto than even paleo, right? Like I do not tolerate like all the starchy carbohydrate vegetables like sweet potatoes and squashes when I have a lot of stress in my body. So I also am
Oh,
using
interesting.
it to figure out how much can I exercise and what should I be doing based on the other stuff that I have going on in my life and how much stress I can tolerate. The coolest thing I did was I went to a 7-day meditation retreat. And this was like the second week of my glucometer. So I had the first 7 days on the same glucometer, before I went to the retreat. And then the second 7 days was at a meditation retreat. And you meditate for about, I would say, 25 hours in a week, maybe 30 hours in a week. But I wasn't really paying too much attention to my diet. Like I was eating fruit, and normally I can't eat fruit when I have a lot of stress. I was eating a little bit more starchy vegetables, and I think I even ate some corn, which usually would send my blood sugar crazy. My blood sugar was so stable and so low, I couldn't believe it. Like I was eating loads of papaya, and my blood sugar was not really moving at all. And so it really helps. And it was very eye-opening that I have to really work to manage stress. And I would tell you, the patients that struggle the most with their weight and their blood sugar, they're not managing their stress well, because we get stuck in these sympathetic states, right? We're in sympathetic overdrive, which also raises blood sugar, raises insulin and cortisol. And so we forget that the stress, the sympathetic state that we're in, actually impacts our blood sugar. It's not just what we're eating.
That is so fascinating. And just the idea that our diet can depend heavily on the amount of stress in our lives, and what we can eat and how we should be training is variable depending on what else is going on. I think that's
Yeah.
a very unique perspective, and one that I think Americans struggle with, probably because we're so all in or all out. I need to go to HIIT class 5 days per week. I need to go to my boot camp class. Like, that's what's right for me. Not really giving credence to, like, I've had a long day. Traffic was horrible. Kids are screaming at me. Like, I'm overwhelmed. Like, it's one of those days when you're driving home and you just like turn the music off entirely and you just sit in your car, just like dead to the world. Like, you got
Yep.
to pay attention to those signs. So I'm curious, was there any sort of metric you were looking at in terms of monitoring your own stress, or was it just like personal feelings, kind of subjective on how you're doing at the moment?
It was just more subjective for me and how I was doing at the moment. But I also, it's not always apparent how you're handling and dealing with stress. So I literally was allowing my blood sugar to guide me on what I should be doing. Like, for example, at night, if my blood sugar was dropping, because I tend to have a lot of variability more than like spikes. So, meaning like it'll drop more, it'll drop lower. I'll tend to be on the hypoglycemic state. So, if my blood sugar wasn't stable at night, I knew that I probably shouldn't go do a HIIT workout. I knew that maybe I could do more of a long, steady state cardio, zone 2 cardio. And then if I sleep really good, then I can probably hit it hard with the weights and maybe do a little bit more HIIT style training. But I did have to dial it back. Like, now I lift weights probably 3 days a week, and I walk about 10,000 steps a day. And every time I walk, it doesn't seem to stress me out at all. Blood sugar goes down and it's stable, and I get some motion in there. But with the HIIT and the weights and getting your heart rate elevated, I have to be very careful with that.
So when you say your blood sugar is not stable, what are you looking at to determine if it's not stable? Just like is there a certain amount of up and down? Like, if I vary by 50 points in an hour, like what's not stable to you mean?
So I use a company called Thea. I don't have any financial ties to Thea, but their app will actually give you a variability score. And so I am always
Oh,
looking at that
interesting.
variability score to make sure it's in the single digits. And that would be a good score. All right. So they look at variability, they look at exercise, they look at the diet, the food that you are eating, and they kind of add it all together, and they give you a daily score in addition to your variability score. And I'm kind of competitive, a little competitive. So I really make a game out of it. For me, I always want to make an A. So I'm really working to dial that in, and looking at it, and allowing that to really dictate what I'm doing for the day as far as diet and exercise and meditation. Right. So, like, you can see what your body does when you go into the sauna. I love going into the sauna, but if I go in the sauna for more than 30 minutes at a time, my blood sugar starts climbing and then it crashes. So 30 minutes is really what my body can tolerate of that heat stress. If I meditate, it always goes down and stabilizes. And I try to meditate every single day, just because I know how important that is for my overall health. But I did not meditate every day when I wasn't looking at my blood sugar.
Fascinating. Okay, so if I'm reading this right, Dr. Heather, if we want to get our autoimmunes under control, or even control lifestyle, like before autoimmune kind of rears up, if we know we have a genetic predisposition for that, we need to be monitoring our stress. That's like almost paramount. First thing we can look at, and something that you can take into your control right away through some mindfulness practices, through some meditation, even through going on long walks. And then secondly, we need to be looking at our food choices, specifically as how they relate to our blood sugar issues. And it sounds like if we're able to do those two things, we are probably 80% of the way there of either controlling or mitigating potential autoimmune diseases. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that that would be a good start on the things that you can do on your own. Then the next step that you would do is really dig in to figure out what are the other triggers. And in order to do that, you need testing, right? You need to see, are you dealing with a heavy toxic burden? You need to see, do you have other food sensitivities? You need to look at your gut. Is there underlying infections? Is there a lot of inflammatory markers? So, really digging in there and doing very thorough testing to customize a treatment plan is the next step. But I will tell you that if you don't get your stress together, and how you're managing stress, and you don't change the way that you're eating to optimize your blood sugar, it doesn't matter what testing you do and how many supplements you take, you're going to get minimal results.
That's a like I'm going to clip that up right there because that's so important. And I think that is one thing that just a lot of us don't take into account, right? It's all about diet, it's all about exercise, it's all about medications. What can we do from those perspectives? How can we apply the band-aid after the fact, not realizing that a lot of this comes from our internal way we're dealing with the world and handling stressors. I don't think people
Yeah.
realize that having high stress actually increases your cortisol, increases your insulin, increases your blood sugar. And it's so
Yeah.
cool that you have all this data around the CGMs. Would you say that like every single person, like I always say that people like should definitely track their food for at least a month in their life. They have to. It just the education it brings to looking at food labels and that sort of thing is invaluable. Would you say the same thing for wearing a CGM,
Yeah, I
glucose
would
monitor?
agree. I put them on my kids. I put them on my husband. So my kids are athletes, right? I say kids. One's 20 and one's 19. My 20-year-old plays baseball in college, and his diet's terrible. So I raised him way differently, and I keep trying to tell him if he wants to have peak performance, we have to pay attention to what he's putting in his body. So I said, let's just do a challenge. I want you to wear this CGM, and let's see what your blood sugar does. And sure enough, I would say he probably has a little bit more resiliency because of how much muscle mass you have. I think that's another, tangent we could probably go on, because the more muscle mass you have, the more your body is more efficient at metabolizing glucose. So his blood sugar, it wasn't as bad as what I thought it was, but it was going up significantly into the 180s and 200s. When he went and he said, I'm going to try this, Mom. I'm going to go to In-N-Out. And I said, okay, go to In-N-Out and get what you would normally get. And he gets like animal fries and a burger. And he goes, I got the burger lettuce wrap. I'm like, oh, good. Thank goodness you did that. And then he got a milkshake. And, I said, but let's try to eat it in the right order. Like, eat your burger first. Let's get some fiber and protein, and then eat your fries, and then eat your shake last. And honestly, his blood sugar went up to about 150, 160. Like, if I did that, my blood sugar would like blown out, and who knows how high it would have been. But it allowed him to see like how much it spiked for him in just eating that. And then I tried to work with him to understand how he was feeling after that meal. And sure enough, I mean, he got tired and he wanted to go take a nap. And so it's very important, if you want to maximize performance in any way, or you want to optimize your health, you've got to look at how foods are impacting your blood sugar, but also how stress and lifestyle is impacting your blood sugar. And I think a lot of people think it's food only that impacts your blood sugar, but it's so multifaceted.
Hmm. Tell your son the premier order In-N-Out is a 3x3 animal style with a Flying Dutchman on the side.
Okay, I'll
That's a
tell
that's a little life hack.
him. I am not condoning
Yeah,
that.
yeah. That's no that but that's the order. That's the like it's just I'm not making this up. This is just science. Everyone says so.
Okay, at least it's
So
animal
Dr.
style.
Heather, we talked a little that's right. We talked about stress levels. We talked about like managing blood sugar through proper nutrition. We talked about testing. What else do people need to know about autoimmunes if they're dealing with something like this?
I think it's really important to know that you're not stuck with autoimmunity. Autoimmunity can go into remission. And so, if you're dealing with autoimmune symptoms, that means that you have not addressed all the underlying triggers. So, the most important thing is not to give up and just to succumb to this lifestyle or these disease processes, but to know that the body is born to heal, and you just have to figure out what are the underlying triggers that have not yet been resolved, and continue to search, because I know that the body, everybody, Everybody is born to heal, and it's pretty miraculous whenever you start to just handle all those underlying imbalances, how much it can recover.
That's great to hear. I've heard metabolic disease or metabolic syndrome described as being a paper tiger before. It's like it's something that can be very negative, but it also is something that is completely reversible with the right interventions, especially from like a diet and lifestyle perspective. Would you say the same thing about autoimmunes?
Yes, it's not as easy. It's a little bit more complicated, but we don't necessarily use the term reverse autoimmunity. We use the term put autoimmune into remission, and I think it's very important because you're dealing with a genetic issue. When your environment changes, then your symptoms are going to come back. The immune system is going to start attacking the body again, which is why it's very important that you have a constant attention on maximizing your health and making sure that you're handling those underlying triggers. Like for me, I have Hashimoto's. It's in remission. My antibodies are super low. I've got zero symptoms, but I'm constantly looking at my blood sugar. I run my labs, several times a year just to make sure if I need to fine tune something. And then, with diet and lifestyle and nutritional supplements, you can pretty much keep it all at bay without it coming back or moving back into or having a flare up or triggering another autoimmune issue. But it's something that it's not like a cure. It's something you've got to really look at and make sure that you're handling your health optimally.
And not just today, but for the rest of our lives. It's not like you can
And
have a
that,
salad and fix your
yeah,
autoimmune.
that goes to say with insulin resistance too and metabolic syndrome. It's not like you fix it and then you go back and eat in and out every day and then it's not going to come back, right? I'm picking on in and out, but it's probably one of the better fast food places to eat. But it's like you have to have your health as a priority. It's not like it's a journey, and this journey doesn't end until your last breath. And so health is an ever changing continuum or a spectrum. It's not like you're healthy just in the absence of disease, or it's not like you're only sick if you have a disease. But when we're looking at health, it's very dynamic, and you've got to really understand that your lifestyle has to support health.
100%. So piggybacking off that, just one final question for you. If I were to give you $50 million, but you had to gain 100 pounds and keep it on the rest of your life, would you take that deal?
I had to gain how much? 100 pounds?
100 pounds. Yeah. And you gotta gain, and you own that 100 pounds. That's how you live now.
Oh, I have to keep it on forever? Oh, I was going to
Oh yeah.
say I would do it because I know how to lose it. But if I have to keep that on forever, no way. No amount of money would it be
For
worth it
50 mil,
for
you heard it here first, folks.
no way. I think I could probably make 50
I
million
love it.
and do it in a healthy, optimal way.
100%. Yeah. I just like that question because I think it's so many people will put all this pressure on themselves to earn more money at the expense of, their health, their lifestyle, their family dynamics and stuff like that, thinking that in the future, I'll fix my health. In the future, I'll spend time with my family. In the future, we'll go on those vacations, not realizing the cost of what those things are in the moment and how, tomorrow's not promised, especially if you have given up your health in pursuit of these other things. So I love what you said about keeping that as like one of the number one priorities, using your health as a foundation to build everything else off of. And if you have your health, you can make 50 mil. It's not a big
That's
deal,
right.
but not having your health is now something that's like, you can't really put a price on that. So
I've seen so many
Dr. Heather,
people.
this was fascinating. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've seen so many people because I see it every day that work their whole lives to enjoy this retirement, this retirement life that they've created, but they're too sick to do anything. They're overweight. They don't even fit in an airplane. It's too much to travel because they can't walk and they don't have stamina. And they literally sit in their chairs watching TV and going to doctor's appointments. And I actually, sadly enough, had a patient who started care, and he said he didn't want to spend $5,000 on his health care. He wanted to leave that to his grandchildren. And I asked him, I said, "You really think $5,000 is going to make any difference in your grandkids' lives?" And he's like, "Well, at least it'll leave them something." So he gave up and he literally had a heart attack walking his dog like a week later. And his daughter and his wife were in my office bawling their eyes out, because they did not have any idea that he quit because of the money. And it was like how they did not understand how he could do that. And if we could just put the priority on our health, everything else would be so much easier and more enjoyable.
Man, it's a mic drop moment there. Dr. Heather, thank you so much for your time, just bringing some wisdom and education to us today. Anything you want to leave us with before we go?
No, I mean, well, one thing I could leave you with before you go, and it's the most important thing, is that just know that your body was born to heal and you should never give up, no matter how severe you may think that you are. But just start with one thing at a time, and your body will respond.
Awesome. Dr. Heather, you've been a wealth of knowledge. You got some really cool, like you have your thyroid transformation blueprint as well that I'll link to in the show notes here as well. But thanks for so much for being on the show today. I think this is a really important episode, and I think people are going to get a lot of value out of it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I've had an amazing time.
All right, talk soon.
Okay.